Hi, I'm Peter Robbo, and welcome to the Downhill Slide. On this series, we're going to be meeting some of Australia's best freestyle skiers and snowboarders from times past, plus a few internationals too. So get comfy and buckle up for this podcast edition of the Downhill Slide.
I win, you lose. It's only for us two. I win, you lose. I remember days when we were all alone. If you would ever leave me, I would call you.
On this episode of the Downhill Slide, we're going to meet one of the greats of Australian freestyle skiing from the 80s and 90s, a team member at the first 86 World Championships in France, 16 Australian, state and European titles to his name, and founder of the Snowy Mountain Cookie Company. We're going to be getting up close and personal with Australian Mogul skiing champion and Jindabyne local, Mr. Nolen Oayda.
We would talk for days and never leave my home. I think about it. Always find a reason to be strung upon. Always wondered if and when you break my heart, you would try and argue with me from the start. I can live without it.
I know. We're talking a lot of years.
It has been some time, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, for those of you who don't know who I'm speaking to, I'm speaking with Mr. Nolen Oayda. Nolen was Australian Mogul skiing champion and one of the members of the first Australian team to go to the 86 Freestyle World Championships at Tignes in France. So, g'day Nolen and welcome to the Downhill Slide.
Well, g'day, and I'm amazed that you know that stuff.
Not much escapes my attention, I can tell you.
Excellent.
Well, I was going to kick it off, Nolen, with just getting you to tell us a bit about yourself. You know, the young Nolen, where you grew up, school, sports, family, all that sort of thing, just to paint the picture, if you will.
Oh, gosh, that's a lot of stuff. Okay, I'll try and do this so it doesn't bore you. I guess we'll start with skateboarding as a 11-year-old, and that was the overriding passion and something that I would do hours on end. And it gave me a really good foundation, I think, for the whole skiing world because, you know, that balance that you get from a skateboard. And from there, do you want me to keep going?
Oh, yeah, please do.
All right. Well, the reason why skateboarding ended and skiing started was I finally made the cut for a professional skateboard team. And after a couple of weeks, my dad sort of cottoned on to it and said, "Nah, you're not doing this." So that got shut down. But I was a very lucky kid because my family had bought an apartment in Perisher back in the mid-'70s. And it meant that I had somewhere to stay. And my sister came from a strict family, and she was only allowed to go away and go out when little brother was with her. So what it meant was that we would travel to the snow every weekend and all holidays and ski a ridiculous amount of time every year because I was her freedom ticket and she was my ticket for lots of skiing. So I got to spend a lot of time on the hill as a young kid. So I was pretty lucky in that sense. So mainly with my sister. I actually never ever really skied with parents at all. In fact, my dad only saw me ski once live, and that was a special trip. He came to Guthiga to see me compete in something, and otherwise, it was all self-driven.
Okay, what appealed to you about freestyle skiing back in those days?
Oh, you know, it was so different, really. It really was freestyle. It was wild. You know, we're talking mid to late 70s when it was just, it was a professional circuit. And the first event I went to was the Amco Cup. Oh, gosh, I don't even know what year that was. And then followed by the Peter Stuyvesant Tour, which I wasn't allowed to compete in because I was too young. And so I got to hang out with all these people that were probably about 10 years older than I was. because there wasn't a lot of young kids doing freestyle back then. And I had this amazing influence from all these older, wild, amazing skiers and just, people traveling the world skiing, doing freestyle events. And I just thought, hey, this is so much fun. And I just enjoyed all the different balance, the different sort of sense of balance that came with freestyle skiing. And that, I was really lucky in that sense too, because everybody did take me under their wing, and I did learn a lot of stuff because of that. There were just so many people willing to give me advice and lend a helping hand. I mean, John Faulkner, I don't know if you remember that name, but that's a classic example of him inviting me as a 15-year-old to spend 6 weeks with him in Verbier, Switzerland, training.
Wow.
Who does that?
John Faulkner, that's a name that goes right back to the very, very start of freestyle in Australia, doesn't it?
Yeah, he's definitely one of the pioneers for sure.
Yeah, I remember him working with Eric Hymans from Team Red back in the very early days, teaching Eric all the essentials about not only jumping but landing. So
yeah, essentials, as you said.
Well, once you're up, it's easy. It's always in the landing, isn't it? The devil's in the details.
Absolutely.
So tell me, why have you selected the Jindabyne area? Because you've been at Jindabyne for quite a long time now.
Yeah, look, in this area, it's something like 30-something years, 30 plus years. Oh, look, like most of us, we were drawn here originally from, with that passion to be on the mountain to ski. And as a lot of us did, you did the back-to-back winters for many years in a row. And then sooner or later, you kind of go, where am I going to settle down year round? And knowing that, it was either going to be overseas or in Australia. And Australia was just easier with visas and all that sort of stuff. And so Jindabyne became kind of like the obvious place because they built a friendship, a network of friends, and also because I always had the snow there. And now, all these years later, what I love about it too is that, 2 hours away, we've got this amazing south coast, and we definitely, share our time between the south coast and Jindabyne now.
So you're surfing a bit these days?
Well, yeah, I'm a late starter, so it's great because surfing takes a long time to perfect, and I'll never perfect it. I understand now, but it's a great learning process, and just love being in the ocean and surfing. Yeah, I really do love it.
Where do you head to on the south coast?
We spend a lot of time around that Pambula Beach and Marimbula area. That's for us, it's directly kind of east from Jindabyne. It's a 2-hour drive, so it's really easy. And so we have a lot of friends there, and yeah, it's a great area, beautiful.
When you first got into freestyle, who was your main influence other than John Faulkner?
Oh, good question. Yeah, John was the dominating person, but there was another guy, Marcus Bratter. He was a freestyle coach at Perisher as well with John, and he, still lives in Verbier to this day. And then there are other people like Margot Sears. I don't know if you remember Margot. Of course you would. Frank and Margot Sears, because they were always around, because I think they were managing a lodge in Perisher, so I used to see them a lot. There was, there were so many guys that were supportive. I don't actually remember all their names. It's such a shame. I'm starting to lose my memory, I reckon. But and then going overseas and meeting guys from other countries and other national team members and so forth, and they were always really good with the Aussies back then, because back then we didn't have a coach and we didn't have a manager and we didn't have a team actually. You just turn up and you were representing Australia, and then all these other teams would be laced with managers and coaches and so forth. But they always took you, they watched out for you, so it was a really good vibe on the circuits. Yeah, that's right. It took a while, and it then it started happening, and now it's amazing. Like, now we are world leaders in that scene. Not only are we podium, but we've got this amazing support from coaches to physios to managers to planners to the whole thing. Yeah, it's a different world now.
Oh, it's a totally different sport to when we kicked off and started literally, as they say, hot dogging down the hill.
There was a lot of hot dogging back then.
I heard a funny story, and I don't know if it's true. Apparently, at one of the early races in America, someone was eating a hot dog and dropped it, and the thing took off and went down through the bumps. And that's where the name came from, apparently. So I don't know if that's true or not, but I like the story.
Well, I'm going to go with it. It's the truth. Sure.
Tell us about some of the first contests you entered as a kid, and what sponsors sort of came along with you in those early days.
Oh gosh. Okay, one of the probably the most significant first Australian competition I went to was like the junior Australian title. It was held in Smiggins, and I remember it fairly clearly, actually. It was only a small event, relatively speaking, but I've still actually got the results, the printed results. And I think there was about 30 people in the moguls, and there were some local kids that were born and raised in Perisher who were the ones to beat. And in the first run, one of those kids, I forgot the last name, but it was one of the sons of the general manager back then of Perisher. You would probably know the names, but his first run was I think he got 12 out of 15, and then my first run I got 13 out of 15, and then his second run he got 14 out of 15, and then my second run they gave me 15 out of 15. So clearly, I was just over the moon. Significant sort of first competitions overseas that I remember, other than that one that you brought up in teens, and even before that in Lavigno and the World Juniors, and like in the very beginning days. But probably the one I remember, my first best result would be in La Clusa, and I became the first Australian to win a combined event in the Europa Cup. And then the next probably big one for me was the Europa Cup Moguls. A couple of years later, a few years later, I became the first Australian to win a Moguls European Cup. So yeah, they were sort of like highlights for me. Yeah.
Sure. Who went with you in those early days, and what year are we talking about?
Ooh, okay. So those first events, like the first Junior Worlds I went to and so forth, that was probably around that 81, 82 time. In fact, I remember being driven from Verbier to somewhere in France, not far, with Hanno Trendle, who was one of the FIS and judges at that time, and he was a good friend of John Faulkner's, and I remember driving in his flashy BMW all the way through these S-bends, and it was just the trip there and back was just so bizarre, but I remember it clearly. So, and then the Australians that I used to hang out with at some of these events later, several years later, became lifetime friends, such as Marcus Lovett. Marcus and I are still really good buddies, and Lynn Gross, who rests in peace. And yeah, that was probably the core of us, that we probably traveled together a little bit, and we would meet up every now and again. We weren't quite a team, but we were at one year we were all based in La Clusa, so that was probably the closest we got to being a team. We were all in the same resort, and then other times Marcus and I were in Verbier at the same time too.
Okay. What sort of equipment were you using in those early days?
I was probably one of the first kits. I was on the Rosenthal Solomon setup. Through my through my work and time spent with John Faulkner and Mark Shapiro and Ace Cavalli, I was very fortunate to be amongst that Columban group, and from that I was able to tap into the sponsorship through that source, along with other sponsors I found myself. So, so as an example, I was sponsored by France and Solomon France rather than Australia. So that was a huge bonus and benefit. And then, the equipment range, it went through a few different brands after that, through different sponsors, from Atomic to Elan and so forth. But it chopped and changed. Back in those days, the Mogul ski, they started actually really creating Mogul skis and aerial skis and ballet skis when it was a combined sport, and then it specialised in all the different disciplines. So the equipment evolved, definitely.
Did you have a favourite kit?
Yeah, look, I think that when I was on Rosenron Solomon bindings, I was on Lang boots. That's the setup I remember the most. I do remember once going to the Atomic factory in Austria or something, and going downstairs to all the handmade skis, and the guy that took me down there is wearing this white jacket, and I felt like I was at the hospital or something, and then he asked me exactly what flex pattern I wanted to choose from, and I kind of looked at him and went, flex pattern? What do you mean? So I just told him how I ski, and then he decided what skis I should be on. And I remember getting on those skis for the first time, and it was mind-blowing. I was just like, oh my God, handmade skis, I get it. Windows everywhere, and again, people in white jackets. And they had this Tyrolean binding set up on this machine, automated machine. It was bumping and moving as if, simulating skiers and so forth. I said, oh, what's going on there? And they said, oh, we're just trying to figure out how to improve the Tyrolean binding so we can put a patent on it.
You got to love the ski industry.
Yes, absolutely.
So when this first World Championships came up, I think it was '86, and was held at Tignes in France, you went across with Randy Weeman, I think, was the captain. Randy, I remember very well from the early days of freestyle. He basically was the force behind the whole movement in those early days. I think Guy Cantrell was on the team. I think Mark Stephen might have been there too, from Falls Creek, from Team Red. Tell us a bit about that first '86 World Championships.
I do remember bits of it, and I'll take a quick note to just to say that Randy was definitely a force in the whole freestyle scene in Australia, and an influence on me as well, and a great supporter all the time. The '86 World Championships, going there as a team was actually quite different. We had never really done that. We'd never really sort of rocked up with the same jackets and a coach or a manager as such. So that was kind of different. I think that was the year I was. That was the first year that I was doing a full tour of the World Cup circuit. And I had sort of been dabbling in off and on in the events a couple of years prior. So I had built a good relationship with a lot of the coaches and athletes from the other teams. And I do remember that, like Mark Stevens is an awesome mogul skier. And, the whole team, we were all pretty strong, and we actually were feeling quite confident. And I do remember my run, actually, and I remember my qualifying run, and I got down to the bottom, and it was a clean run, and I actually thought it was, something that could maybe get me into the finals. I wasn't jumping up and down, but I felt really good about it. And I remember the American coach coming up to me, Park Smalley, and saying, he said, quality run, Noel. He said, that's what you wanted. As any judge sport, you can complain about your run, that you didn't win or you didn't qualify or whatever. It is a judge sport, but the ones that are maybe getting, a higher result than you, it's because they have done the hard yards and they have built their reputation. And it does come back to reputation. I remember the day that I won that that Europa Cup. It was a double event weekend. So there was 2 Europa Cup Mogul championships they were making up for one. And the second day, I actually fell in my run. And normally I would have come at the end of the field, maybe second or third last. And I think I came like 2 off from being qualified for the finals, you know, because I was the champion the day before. So you know, we can all sort of say we skied well and we got ripped off, but realistically, you've got to put the yards in. And if you are that person that blows them out of the water in your first year, it's because you are like top 3 from the day one, you know. And there's not many of us like that. A lot of us have to do the yards first before you get there. You know, I don't remember the air that I was throwing, but it was pretty lame, I've got to say, back then. You know, when you look at what they do now, it's kind of like people go, well, what were you jumping? You kind of go, twister. You know, it's almost embarrassing what we were doing back then, and that was meant to be, you know, world elite level. But I do remember it was an enjoyable run. It was a clean run. No, I mean, you look back at it and you know you could do better because you could have made it amazing. But, you know, sometimes in those qualifying runs, amazing isn't what you're trying to do. But, you know, look, I think I definitely didn't reach the peak I wanted to get to. I hurt myself before I sort of maxed out on my skills, I believe. And that's just how it runs. And I'm not the only athlete that's ever come across that sort of path. But in saying that, I would like to take a moment just to sort of acknowledge probably a good friend of mine, Marcus Lovett, who went on to be an aerial specialist and did become a regular podium finish placer. And sometimes I think he was probably didn't receive as much credit as he deserved, because back in the 80s, he was throwing twisting triple flips, and it took a long time before any other Australian got close to that.
And then I think he worked with Kirsty Marshall for a bit as her coach. In those days, I was working with the Alpine News as the editor, and I still remember the news when it came through that Kirsty had won a World Cup, and it was such a big deal.
Yeah, she was an amazing athlete, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. Snowboarding is an amazing sport to look at its history and see how it's evolved in such a short period of time. Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you ever take up the sideways stance and do some snowboarding?
Well, I did actually. Yes, I took it up for a little while. I remember when I first saw my to-be wife, and I saw that she could telemark, snowboard, and alpine ski. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to give it a go. Yeah, I did get into snowboarding for a little while, but it was when I used to be a photographer, and so having photography gear on your back and so forth, and being on a snowboard, and when you want to just take one step forward to get the right framing, it was just too hard. It was too hard, too much work for that. So from I think about 1989, I became just a telemark skier and have been ever since. Yes, no heels attached, but yeah, that's been since '89.
When did you pick up your interest in photography?
Yes, it was after I had 2 years off from skiing altogether, from after just sort of saying, this injury is driving me crazy, I need time out. And I went to Sydney for about 2 years, and I think it was in about '89 I moved back to the mountains. 89, that's what happened. I did 2 years in Sydney. In '89 I went to Verbier for a holiday, and I stayed with John Faulkner. He loaned me his telemark equipment. I was on these leather solo boots, I think they were. And, John's like, about another foot taller than me. So is his foot. So I had these boots with pieces of newspaper at the end so that my foot wouldn't move around too much. And I went telemarking for the next week or two, whatever it was I was there. And that was it. I was smitten, and I moved back to Perisher at that stage, and I started telemarking full time and started coaching. And then after coaching and traveling, I started sort of writing stories, because editors were asking me to write stories, and I had to find photographers to have accompanying photos. And then Mark Stevens actually said, "Hey Nolen, use this camera of mine." It was a T90 Canon camera or something, I think it was. And I went to the Albertville Olympics as a coach, took this camera and wrote an article about that event and photographed it for my first time as a photographer. And that's when I started doing photography.
Because I've seen when I look back through some of my old magazines, there was actually quite a few regular contributions from you on freestyling with, I think, Powderhound, who had like a regular segment with them, huh?
Yes. Well, I got to it got to the stage where I think out of the 3 magazines that were being published in Australia at that time, we were in every issue for about 3 years of every edition. Yeah, so we had some really good airplay there. I was getting photos published with Patagonia and other areas, and so it definitely became the full-time job, actually. Quit coaching, and I was just doing photography and writing. That's when I was with Daisy, my wife, and she started traveling together, and that's what we did for years. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you know, where did it start? You know, but in '89, when I finished my time in Sydney, I went to Perisher. I think it was '89. And I saw the Perisher freestyle team. And the Perisher freestyle team back then was made up of about 5 guys, 6 guys and a girl, I think. They were sponsored by Redback. They had these Redback sloppy joes on. And they had this Austrian coach that they talked the ski school into supplying. And he wasn't a mogul coach. He was actually a racer. And one of the guys in the team lived in the same block that I lived in Perisher, and he knew of my history, and he said, "Can you come along one day to one of our classes, you know, one of our training sessions?" And I did, and the coach, although he was a bit, you know, it's like didn't really completely appreciate my presence, after a while he sort of got the picture, and he did embrace my influence there. And within several weeks or whatever it was, I think I ended up becoming the coach of that team. And then the following year, we sort of expanded the team exponentially, and ended up having I don't know how many people in the team, and we had all these sponsors. Back in those days, you know, every team member had 2 pairs of skis and gloves and goggles and a full outfit and ski boots, and it was amazing how many sponsors we had back then. And we worked closely with the Perisher media team, who were getting into those early days where they were filming for snow reports at the end of the news and so forth, and we became their models. So we were on, so they could see a benefit in us, and so the resort started to see how we could be of some sort of benefit, because otherwise we were rat bags, right? And so we had this sort of partnership there where we understood each other, and that sport and that team was able to grow over the years. And I'm very proud to say that Peter Topalovic ended up being, you know, was one of my students, and now he has really changed the face of freestyle skiing in Australia. He's probably the biggest shaker and mover as far as putting Australia on the world map.
And then when snowboarding came along, it really shook it up a little bit again, which I thought was really healthy. Plus, you had all these new guys showing up on the hill that most of them had never been to a resort before. They were surfers, they were skateboarders, and they dragged that whole city urban vibe with them too. And you know, there were plenty of nervous moments with the ski resorts, but change never comes easily, huh?
No, not at all. And you're right, that snowboarding, evolution was I think the snowboarders did it harder than the freestyle skiers did or the hot doggers did because, you guys were so foreign because you only had one plank. It was like, what are they doing? But but boy, didn't it change and shake up the whole ski world. It's the best thing that ever happened to alpine skiing.
Oh, I think especially when you look back at how the design of the snowboard actually changed the design of the ski. They decided to go this parabolic path with them, and all of a sudden you had something that was vastly different to what you had the day before. And here we are 30 something years later, and freestyle skiing became very, very big. And of course, the main avenue where Australian skiing has been successful in comparison to alpine skiing. And then snowboarding speaks its own path with some of the champions that we've had over the last 10, 15 years, from Tora Bryant to now we got Scotty James, we had Chumpy Pullen, and there were many guys prior to that went over and did, as you said earlier with the skiing, the hard yards on those world tours and world cups and world championships. I remember Zeke Stegel was almost a lone competitor on the racing circuit, and then we had people like Dave Kelly and Jason Haynes and these sorts of guys showing up at the snowboarding events.
Yeah, I think all that time though, it gives it the soul. That's the soul of that sport. That all that grit and all those knockbacks. I think it gives it more depth. Yeah, no, telemarketing's been a great influence, and it definitely re-sparked my love for skiing after wanting to stop competing and so forth in the alpine world and moguls and so forth. So it was like starting again. The hill was steep again when I first started on those telemarks, and when we were doing it, we started on pure leather boots and we were on the hill with the skiers, and the equipment did evolve, but right from that word go, and when I was coaching the freestyle team, and I was always on telemark, so I skied the moguls with them. And even to the point when we were building the jump up there in Perisher Front Valley, as the coach, I would shape the jump, and I would be the first person to jump off the jump on my 195 telemark skis. So I was doing backflips and everything like that. But that gave the kids in the team so much motivation. There's like, well, if the coach is going to be jumping backflips on telly, I'm going to have to do it too. I've got my alpine, so. So it was a good thing for coaching as well, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. When I was looking up about you, I didn't realise you had so many titles to your name. I think it amassed to something like 16 freestyle titles that you've taken. Can you name some of them, and which one is your favourite?
Well, I never really got the title I wanted, but anyway, I'll let that go. Look, a lot of them were Australian titles. I mean, there was the Europa Cup ones that I mentioned too. Look, I remember one that was really sweet in that I was representing Guthica at the time. I was sponsored by Guthica for a year or two, and the Guthica team went to Bulla for one of the national titles there. And back then there was Team Red, there was Team Bulla, there was and Team Threadbow and so forth. And it was myself and a girlfriend that I had back in those days who I'd taught how to do freestyle. And we turned up, and there were only 2 events held because this is when it was combined skiing back as well. Some people had started specialising, but I was still doing combined. And the moguls and the ballet was held. The aerials was cancelled because of bad weather. But between myself, I won both events, and my girlfriend won the mogul. I won the ballet and came second in the moguls. And so it was great to just be the 2 of us against all the teams. And walk away with all the trophies. That was just one of those little sweet moments where we kind of go, hey, we did it with nobody's help. Yeah, no, it was fun. But, and saying that, we had so much fun hanging out with the teams as well. So it was always fun.
Where you had a major knee injury happen, and I was wondering if you can tell us where it happened and life after this event crossed your path.
Wow, yeah. Bittersweet memories, actually. It was the very last World Cup of the tour. It was my first year doing a full World Cup tour. I think I'm pretty sure I went to pretty much all. I might have missed one or two. We were in Voss in Norway, and I was just fatigued. I was just, as a lot of athletes are, you're in a different country every weekend, and I was just on working on reserve. And I was pretty happy with how the year went. For the first year, I hadn't done anything amazing, but it was good foundations. The day before, we were training on the Mogul Hill, and it was really warm, and we bumped up these huge moguls. Back in those days, they were naturally made, right? Not man-made. And they got massive. They were like, big dub roofs sort of thing. And then it got really cold and froze. And the next morning in training, there were, in the first hour, three athletes blew out their knee. And I was one of those. And I remember just going off one bump, and it was all good. I was in control, and I looked ahead, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to land on the back side of that next one. It was all going to plan. But as soon as I landed, I guess because I was so fatigued and because the moguls were just basically ice, I felt my knee explode. Like I knew, at that moment, I just collapsed and rolled to a heap. And in the end, I had snapped my cruciate, my lateral, I had hairline fracture in my femur, and I had cartilage removed. And so it was pretty major back in those days for that sort of a, injury. I was in Norway. They put me in a full-length plaster. I flew home to Australia and had the reconstruction. And back in those days, the plaster was on for something like 5 months from my hip to my ankle. And within 6 months, I had recovered and I was back on World Cup. And back in those days, you were meant to wait for at least 12 months. And I was sponsored back then. I was on a government grant or whatever it was. So I had to prove to them that I was fit enough to go back onto the tour and receive funding. And I remember doing the tests, and you just had to do like a leg extension test, and they were just gauging it, and they just compared each leg. So my really good leg, I just went really light. And then on my operated knee, I went as hard as I could. And they're like, that's fantastic. You are so ready. So I got back on World Cup, and I did 2 events. I was in Quebec, and I remember skiing the course, and I just had that epiphany, and I thought, Nolen, you are skiing on one leg. You are going to blow up your other knee. It was just so obvious that I was not going to last the World Cup tour. It was the second event. I was in pain. I was skiing on one leg, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to take a break. And I flew to Verbier, Switzerland, to hang out with John and get some mentoring and just have some time to think it out. And after 2 weeks of thinking through a career now that had lasted from, my first proper event of being when I was 14 to now I was 26, I think I was, 26 or 27, I made the call where I said, that's it. I've come to the end of the line. I've got to sort of face it. I'm not going to get to that level that I wanted to get to. I'll never be a World Cup winner. And I pulled the plug. And it was just miserable time. But it was a decision I just made. So, yeah.
And then life takes a turn on you, doesn't it?
Yeah. But, in retrospect, it still shits me. I was going to say something really profound there, but I thought, no, it still shits me.
But wow, I'm amazed that you were up and on a World Cup circuit in 6 months. That's impressive in itself.
Yeah, almost stupid, really.
The things we do for money.
Yeah, that's it. I don't think there was much money in it. I think I was just doing it for passion, actually.
in skiing and in snowboarding, Australia is actually mentioned with all the top nations these days, and I think that's a good
Yeah,
source of pride for the likes of you and I.
yeah, absolutely. It is really nice to see that we're a contender all the time now.
Did you have any young prodigies that you were working with at Perisher on the team in those days that went on to do something or carry your baton forward, if you like?
Well, look, probably from the Perisher team, there weren't really any internationals. I did coach the development team, the Australian development team, 2 years in a row overseas. And then I was a personal coach on the World Cup tour back in '92, I think it was. And that was good. You know, that was quite an experience to have Kylie Gill competing on the full World Cup tour and to be her personal manager and sort of coach. And then when I was coaching the development team, we did the NORAM circuit. And you know, one of the Costa brothers were in that, and you would know that they did quite well. Adrian did really well. So yeah, so I was able to sort of see people progress. And I think, you know, again, as I mentioned with Peter Topalovic, Topper, you know, to be such a big influence in the development of the sport, he pretty much carried on from where I left off. He was the one I handed the baton to, and it's great to see that he took it way further than I would ever have imagined.
How did those days come about of coaching with the Australian team? Who instigated that, and how did that all come around?
That's a great question. Look, I think because I dropped out of the scene for 2 years completely, like I just disappeared. And then when all of a sudden I reappeared on the scene, and I was all of a sudden coaching, and I was living in Perisher, all the people that were, you know, freestyle sort of admin or freestyle on the ground coaches or whatever just started encouraging me to become more involved. Jeff Lipshot was actually somebody that encouraged me to get more involved as well. And then I think somebody asked if I would coach the junior team. You know, the federation asked if I would coach the development team, and I put a program together. And you know, basically you're a manager / coach. And I did that for 2 years in a row after, and then as I mentioned, followed that with the personal coaching. Yeah.
Now, I've just had a flashback. You mentioned Jeff Lipshut, and you mentioned the '92 Albertville Games previously. Jeff Lipshut and I, like Jamie Sutcliffe, we were all concurrents. We all skied against each other at Mount Buller, even though we were all Mount Buller boys. And I thought, what a shame, because the three of us knew each other. We never once acted as a team. We never once did anything together. We always eyeing each other like the enemy. Next thing, it's '92, and team where they were going to stage all the freestyle events. I think they'd had the Moguls the day before in the mist, where Gropey Ron Edgar, the classic, just turned the whole crowd into a festival.
He did. Turned it into a frenzy, didn't he? Yeah.
I loved it. He was. I remember watching him. He come flying down, and he just stopped in the middle of his run on the top of a mogul, just come to a dead stop, stand there, bow to the crowd, wave his batons in the air, and all the crowd would just go literally right off. Then he'd continue on, hammering down, popping airs, this, that, and the other way. And no, he had the crowd in the palm of his hand for that event.
Yeah, and that's funny you mentioned that, because I remember that clearly, and I've mentioned that to other people, but I couldn't ever really project what was really happening. You know, when I'm saying, and he had the crowd going, but I'm glad you said that, because I was there and I saw that exact moment. And it was like, you know, it was like some sort of football stadium, and he had control of everybody. It was amazing, really amazing.
No, in all the years we did it, I never saw anyone do that, and I thought that was just genius. What a genius masterstroke, because the whole crowd roared, and everyone just felt so intimidated. You know, it was like you were skiing in the presence of God. And well, yeah. You know, thanks for the rest of you for showing up. You know.
Yeah, that was a great moment.
With the Australian team, having lunch in the big hall there, all the athletes together, and I'm sitting there, and Jeff says, "You seem distracted. What's the matter?" I said, "I can't believe it. There's Tomba, and there's all these guys that I knew of, and and they're smiling and saying, "Hi, mate, how are you?" And it's like, then he set me up at the bottom of the jump where Kirsty was jumping, and I brought all the gear with me, all the Australian flags, and I was so vocal and so trying to add what Edgar had added to the Moguls the day before to try and swing judging towards Kirsty a little bit, that the French media came over and started filming me. The stars are jumping, but they thought I was so wonderful at the bottom of at the jump event that I became part of the show too.
That's excellent. That's great.
What did I ask you, Nolen? In all these years, when you look back, because you tasted everything, you tasted the highs, you tasted the lows. What do you think you've learned from your time involved with freestyle skiing?
It was more than just the sport. It's it's the people that I met and the things that I saw and the things that I did via the sport. The influences that I was able to put myself amongst because I was a freestyle skier. I keep going back to that Verbier thing with John, because I spent probably 7 years there, maybe more. And, from the age of 15 or 16 or whatever. So say the person I am today is mostly shaped from those years, from 14 to 26 when I was traveling the world and meeting all these amazing different people and experiencing things that you don't normally do in a regular life. So that that is, it's hard to put into words. That just becomes part of you, and I think it's a great thing, and I feel quite privileged to have that experience.
Who was like your actual main local competitors that you skied against?
Oh, look, it probably was Martin Rowley and Mark Stevens would be the two that I always saw as the high-end mogul skiers from Australia, especially Martin. Martin was actually, I think Martin was the best out of us all. But as a skier, not in the competition, he was amazing. Beautiful, beautiful skier. Very technical, very smooth. So yeah, I always thought, when Martin pulls it together on the day, he's going to be hard to beat. It was back in 2000 or 2001 or whatever it was. I had another knee injury, and from it was a pretty basic knee injury, but from that I ended up getting patellar tendonitis, and I didn't ski for 2 years. The problem was my photography specialised in photographing athletes skiing or mountain biking, and so all of a sudden I couldn't actually do that line of work, and pretty much there and then I had to reinvent myself, and I pretty much put the camera down and moved on and never went back.
Well, look, I'm going to boot this baby home, Nolen, with you. If you were some kind of modern day superhero in the world today and you could actually change something, what would be on your hit list?
If I had these incredible powers, I'd have to say there's two things that I would do. And one is that we would all cherish and take care of our environment that we live in so that it only becomes more beautiful. And that kindness between humans would be our strongest point, in that's what we will be known for. So all mankind would be kind, like they say, mankind.
Look, I'd like to thank you for coming on board this podcast edition of the Downhill Slide today with me, and it's been fantastic to talk with you, and it does me good to see you and retouch with that pretty magical spirit I think you've always carried, even from the days when I first met you as a kid. So once again, thank you, Nolen, for being on the Downhill Slide.
Thanks so much, and I do appreciate you allowing me to relive those memories too. Thank you.
To be a great photographer, you need patience and passion. But if you're heading into the Australian Alps to practice your craft, you may want to pack a few hand warmers as well.
Shooting in the snow normally means shooting in the cold weather, so you are going to be cold and you're best to be prepared for it.
Nolen Oayda is a former Australian freestyle ski champion who, on retiring from competitive action, took up journalism as a way to stay in the mountain environment he so clearly loves.
It just feels so good to ski down a mountain and be outside and amongst it. And I had to find something that could keep me there, and it ended up being photography and journalism. The first day I went out and had film in the camera, I think I was shooting the Olympics in Albertville, and you know, it was the first time I took a shot to go with a story that I was writing, and it worked. And I was like, oh my God, I think I could do this. But I also have a passion for landscapes. You're out there in the golden hour, you know, where you're outside, it's quiet, the light's just going crazy, you get the shot, that's pretty special.
Well, that's a wrap for this edition. Hope you enjoyed it. And remember to comment and subscribe below. I'm Peter Robbo, and we'll do this again soon with another take on the downhill slide.